If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like, as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. You know, we stand at a political turning point. The white media certainly seems to understand that. Some of you may not understand, though, why I keep coming back to this issue in particular, but you better realize that there's a political operation going on right now on a number of different fronts, and all of them are geared toward placing the political focus on everyone and everything except for black people this election cycle. The white media and both political parties see exactly what's happening, and they're trying to find a way to short-circuit it, to forestall it, because we just won't let go of issues specifically for us. When idiots like Jason Johnson go on air and demand that the Democrats forget about black voters, specifically to ignore black men, and he doesn't even bother to say what black women should get, he just says focus on Asians and Hispanics instead, that's how you know there's a program at work here. The primaries are going on and black voters are cold on supporting Biden, so we're seeing the white media obsessing over Arab American voters and how angry they are with Biden over the war in Gaza. And they claim that this has begun a movement that's going to keep Biden from getting reelected if it's not resolved soon. But as I've explained, outside of Dearborn, Michigan, this isn't really a problem, because even inside of Michigan, Arab Americans are not a swing vote. Especially not if the black vote is mobilized in numbers. Remember, as Neely Fuller said, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation. This is a political smokescreen meant to conceal what the real threat is. If this was merely about Arab American voters, then outside of Michigan, nobody would be saying anything. They know that this would already be over with, but somebody's a little concerned that this whole thing might have legs. And why would that be?
One thing I feel safe saying is that those who voted uncommitted on Tuesday are not going to vote for Trump. My fear, and the reason why those of us started this campaign, is to basically save Biden from himself, because of what he's done to support this massacre, to fund it, to be the bank for Israel in the slaughter of these people, that he is essentially guaranteeing that thousands and thousands of Americans are going to stay home and not vote on election day because they're not going to vote for Trump. Those of us who were involved in or helping organize and promote this on Tuesday, the Listen to Michigan campaign, we were hoping to get maybe 10 to 15,000 votes. That was it. A few people, the optimists, thought maybe 30,000. The fact that it was over 100,000 means it was a broad, it wasn't just the 9,000 people in Dearborn or the other Arab cities in Michigan where, we have an Arab American mayor and an Arab American city council, Hamtramck, Michigan. No, this was, of course, yes, it was Muslims and it was Arab Americans, but it was also vast, vast numbers of young people. Hillary lost Michigan by just 11,000 votes. Yeah. That's 2 votes on average, 2 votes per precinct in Michigan. That's it. That's how close this could be. And to have 100,000 plus come out on Tuesday and say, you know what, our conscience will not allow us to support this. Right. And if people say, well, so does your conscience allow you to let Trump win? No. What it means actually to me personally is that now I've got to double and quadruple my efforts to make sure Trump loses. Joe Biden, and I plead with him, do not put Trump back in the White House. So why wouldn't Biden listen to this? He wouldn't even acknowledge it when he won the primary. If, as Michelle Goldberg said in the New York Times last Friday, if he loses Michigan, he loses the election. Why would you risk that, President Biden? Why?
Now, you see what Michael Moore said? He admits that in 2016, Hillary Clinton lost Michigan by just 11,000 votes. Now tell me something. Was that because Arab voters were boycotting the Democratic Party in 2016 because they were already anticipating a slaughter in Gaza 7 years later? Is that what it was? No. The reason that Hillary Clinton lost Michigan was because black voters were angry about being ignored by Obama for 8 years, and they were also demanding that Hillary Clinton had to atone for her and her husband's sins during the 90s. And when Bill and Hillary doubled down on their arrogant stance, black voters in Detroit, Flint, and Lansing stayed home. Arab American voters are not as numerous as black voters, not in Michigan and certainly not nationwide. And to say otherwise is to manufacture a political calculus that doesn't exist. And Michael Moore, however, is showing that he's also playing the game. He dances around having to mention the black elephant in the room, which is the black vote. In that whole segment, and I didn't play all of it because of mostly the typical Michael Moore talking points. In that whole segment, he only mentioned black voters once, only in passing, and then he immediately moved on and never came back to black voters at all. He names young people, progressives in Michigan. The base of the Democratic vote are black enclaves, starting with Detroit. But he did everything he could to put off having to say black. Because Moore is an anti-war activist. That's his personal hobby horse. That's something that matters a lot to him. And of course, he doesn't want to take attention away from that. Believe it or not, in my opinion, Michael Moore is more often than not actually responsible with the comments that he makes, but he was very negligent with this one. He went out of his way not to say what the issue is. Now, I guess I would say that in his mind, as he sees it, he doesn't want to take attention away from the tens of thousands of people killed in Gaza and the tens of thousands others who have been injured or displaced. So as far as he's concerned, he's staying focused. But the truth of the matter is, without black votes, it doesn't matter how many Arab Americans boycott the election. Biden still can't win without black votes. And if you mobilize the black vote, then it becomes irrelevant what's happening in Dearborn or elsewhere. Michael Moore also pointed out the New York Times says that if Biden loses Michigan, he loses the election. And Moore asks, why, Biden? Why would you risk that? For the same reason that Obama totally ignored the Flint water crisis, which also happened on Obama's watch. And that was also in Michigan, too, where this genocidal action happened. So you don't have to go to the Middle East to find instances of genocide happening. You can find them right here in the United States. Hillary Clinton ran for the presidency after the Flint water crisis, and she refused to even go to Michigan. Without Michigan, she couldn't win the presidency either. And she didn't win. So why would she do that? This is history repeating itself all over again. A lot of people are desperately hoping that this election will be a repeat of the 2020 election, but when you look at Biden's actions, it's a repeat of the 2016 election. And Michael Moore is revealing himself to be a poor student of history because the answers to all of his questions are slapping him in the face. But he's too afraid to confront the black truth, just like Hillary Clinton was 8 years ago. So let's be clear about something. When you talk about this whole uncommitted thing and 13% of the vote saying uncommitted in the primary, that ain't just Arab Americans in Michigan. You wouldn't have enough for that if it was just them. You also had a lot of black people who were saying it too for their own reasons, though those reasons are clearly not being spoken in the white media. This is part of a problem too. Not that black voters are saying that they're uncommitted, but because of the fact that our voices aren't being heard. You got some black folks who are doing it because they want to say that they stand in solidarity with what's happening in Gaza. As always, you got black folks forever jumping onto bandwagons without ever examining what they're jumping into. Black people were putting on the cape for immigrants not so long ago, with many of those black people being immigrants themselves. Listen up. A movement is only of value if it's specifically meant to benefit you. What we see going on with this whole uncommitted thing, at least as far as Michigan goes, this is a political ploy here. The white media will make it into a specifically Arab-Israel issue. And as a result, you'll have the usual loose talk about a ceasefire, because that's what usually happens after these outbreaks of violence occur. Sooner or later, there's going to be, we come to the table and pretend as if we're going to play nice. And by November, the same Arab Americans who you see so up in arms and saying we won't vote for Biden, they will once again be making nice with the Democrats, as long as they get themselves some cabinet positions or get some other kind of political sweeteners to be given by Biden, political promises, which he will actually make good on, unlike the phony promises he made to black people 4 years ago. And it will all be water under the bridge, and certainly the behavior toward black people, that's not going to change whatsoever. See, when it's a black issue, the white media helps to lead the charge to lie about it and try to disperse the energy and claim that, oh, this is a subject that affects everyone. We can't just limit the discussion to black people. Ain't that what Jackass Johnson said? This is how Black Lives Matters almost immediately had people out there with signs saying Brown Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter, and of course, Palestinian Lives Matter. A lot of people, especially your black activists, have completely and thoroughly conveniently forgotten about that little detail. Black people were being murdered in the streets, and yet you had everybody else literally jumping out in front of our parade and claiming it was all about them. Shamelessly. They didn't give a damn about black lives. And yet these same people are saying that black people should be tripping over their shoelaces and breaking their own necks to stick up for everybody else. And during these blatant and open attempts to subvert and to otherwise undermine what black people were demonstrating for, the white media was helping to signal boost all of these other groups' deliberate efforts to water down the message so that the focus would be taken off of black people. But when it's non-black people who are saying something, the white media didn't let anyone else shoehorn themselves into it. They dang sure didn't let black people do that. You're talking about LGBT issues? Well, that's just going to be them. You're talking about transgender bathrooms? Well, we're not saying nothing about black people. Immigrants? We're not talking about black Americans. Hell, we're barely talking about black immigrants. And that's the way that they play the game. And keep in mind, even the Black Lives Matter groups were bankrolled by wealthy white ideologues like George Soros. Soros and his pals picked the gender-fluid front women that they used for their AstroTurf movement. My point is, even when these people are claiming that they have these opposition groups, it's controlled opposition. So when you see black people who are out there holding up signs talking about uncommitted, just keep in mind, one of the things the white power likes to do is try to find a way to finesse or coerce or trick or con black people into actually working against their own interests. When it comes to all these other groups, or when it comes to their white allies, whenever black people are pressing our issues, they always make sure we're going to talk about everybody else. Oh, it's bigger than just that. It's bigger than just that. Oh, it's a class issue. It's a nationalism issue. It's a human issue. It ain't a black issue. They always do that mess. But even so, these pathetic attempts to hide their heads under the political cover, so to speak, really aren't working. They still can't deny that black people are the ones who they're really worried about, especially when you start talking about the primary races outside of Michigan.
We're all concerned about Trump.
Right.
No one is more anti-Trump than the Arab and Muslim community. I can assure you of that. But this is a message now about something that's very personal. It's not political. It's not a purity test. People have friends and family they've lost in Gaza.
If it were that well politically calculated, that would be one thing. But you have been hearing from people who are not saying, I'm going to just send a message to the Biden administration now. They're saying, I'm not going to vote for Biden in the coming election. And it's not just Arabs and Muslims.
Right.
It's progressives. It's young people.
Yes.
It's some black people. It's some Jewish people.
Yes.
Joe Biden now cannot go on a college campus and do a rally because people are going to protest about Gaza. That's his base. That he can't go to a black church. This is a big problem.
So you see how they slip in a couple of teaspoons of truth? That way, hopefully, people get confused. They try to make it seem as if, well, black people are concerned about what's going on in Gaza. Yeah, they're more concerned about Gaza than they are with what's going on in their own lives. Same way that every time the white media talks about some Negro shill for the DNC, they always say, but black people are concerned about abortion. They're concerned about LGBT rights. They're concerned about immigration. Never about black people being concerned for their own interests. Yeah, we're just concerned about everybody else. So you need to ignore black people because that's what black people want you to do. The single protest that this Beinart character was talking about took place at Brown Chapel AME Church. Same church that ended Mike Bloomberg's career, by the way. And when there, it was white people who were the ones protesting Joe Biden. It wasn't the black parishioners who stood up and said anything. It was white people who were doing that. But look what he does. He said Biden can't even go to a black church. Yeah, because you had some white people who decided they were going to disrupt things. And I think that was peremptory. It gives Biden a way to say, oh, I can't go to these black churches anymore because it's going to be too rowdy there. The DNC shills can go ahead and say, well, he can't go to those black churches anymore because you never know if he's going to get protested over Gaza. What he's really concerned about is that black people will give him the same treatment that Brown Chapel AME Church gave Bloomberg when those black parishioners stood up and turned their backs on him. That killed Bloomberg's presidential campaign dead 4 years ago. And Biden is terrified of suffering the same fate. So claiming that he can't go to these black churches because he's concerned about Gaza protesters, that gives him a way to avoid black people's issues and avoid black people's demands. And it gives the white media and their bootlicks a way to avoid talking about that too. How convenient. Do you notice that Ali Velshi doesn't name Asians or Hispanics or white women as the groups to be concerned about? The three groups who the Democrats have been trying to pivot to neutralize the growing threat of black political demands? When they slip up and say what the score really is, they admit that the Arab threat to the Democrats is small and limited only to Michigan. When you get outside of that, the problem becomes undeniably black voters. And when they say young voters, that means young black voters, who clowns like Jason Johnson and Roly-Poly Martin have viciously attacked, by the way. They know what the real threat here is. That's the reason why they're banging the drum so heavily for this. They're trying to ingrain into the public mind that Biden is under threat from Arab American voters, and if he loses, that's what it's about. Because that's what people mostly remember. They mostly remember what they heard the most often. That's why I keep telling you, history is whatever people are told the most often, because that's usually what ingrains itself into the mass consciousness. Now, for about the last week and a half or so, Biden has been making some loose talk about a ceasefire of some sort. What he's trying to do now is to make nice with Arab American voters. He's sending representatives to basically talk them to death. And there will be a lot of talk made with the white activist class, the Michael Moores and others, and they will try to say, see, Biden's finally dealt with this issue. He finally gave Benjamin Netanyahu a rap on the knuckles. Now you need to go back to voting for Biden because the orange man is bad, fascism is looming on America, and this is going to be the twilight of democracy in the U.S. Not that this country ever had any democracy to lose. America is like a whore who's been out there throwing its legs open for decades and then turning around and saying, you've got to protect my virtue. That's what I hear whenever some clown talks about American democracy could be lost. How the hell are you going to lose what you never had? But you notice, of course, how the white political class, they're not lecturing and lambasting the Arabs about what they're doing. You don't have any equivalent of nigger Jim Clyburn getting out there saying, stop sloganizing kills. They're not doing any of that. With the Arab American voters, they're being pretty as you please. They're walking on eggshells. They're not sitting here lecturing them and wagging their fingers at them and condescending to them and telling them what they better do. They're not doing that at all. So you can go ahead and get out there and you can tell Biden we're going to cost you the election. And as long as you're not black, they're going to be polite with you. Well, what's wrong? What can we do? What can we do to at least talk to you? They're going to act like they got some sense. With black people, it's going to be completely and thoroughly abusive. What the hell is that for us to be voting for? Again, family, the white media is already laying the groundwork to blame a Biden defeat on everyone except for us. That's the political operation that's going on here. They can't afford to start a serious discussion about how finally doing what we want is a prerequisite for an electoral win. Nobody's going to be getting out there saying, oh, well, black people, they're the ones who you need to be actually catering to. See, that's what happens with the white right. Republicans lose an election, well, you ought to be concerned about those white rural voters. You didn't do enough to cater to them. But my point is, you better be realistic. Any black person who thinks that siding with Uncommitted is somehow going to bring attention to what we want to, as if this is somehow going to be spread to black people, at least as far as the rhetoric goes, you're delusional. As I've been saying, white power is annoyed by Arab American demands, but it's only scared of black demands, because black demands are the only ones that actually threaten the system. Super Tuesday is looming, and the Democrats are not worried about Arab voters outside of Dearborn. This is the time for black people to elbow our way into the proceedings and to say that we are the face of the uncommitted voters. We should be, because we were uncommitted before uncommitted was cool. Hijack the issue is what we should do. The same way the Palestinian Lives Matters folks were hijacking the BLM protest back in the day. We have to show that if other people don't respect our political autonomy and don't respect when we're trying to assert our concerns, then we don't have to respect when they do it either. This is not about the white media trying to protect Joe Biden. This is about them trying to protect a racial status quo. This is about laying the groundwork early for what the talking points are going to be in November if Biden loses. This is about indoctrinating the public through the repetition of a lie that this is all about Gaza, or immigrants, or abortion rights, or voting rights, and that means allowing illegal aliens the right to vote. But whatever the reason is for Biden's loss, it's not going to be black voters. That's going to be out of sight, out of mind. So there's no reason for the white media or the empty-headed commenters like Jason Johnson and their other shills to say that the Democrats better start listening to black voters now, and that as a result of this election, why this proves you got to start re-engaging with that black base or you're going to continue to lose elections. Now, nobody's going to be saying that that's the reason why. Instead, what we hear is that the U.S. needs to be more engaged with the peace process. Because the U.S. has never actually thought about the peace process in the Middle East before. And there's going to be a few more cookouts at Camp David, but nothing of any substance is going to change. I think that black people have every right to elbow our way into this whole thing and make it very clear. Forget about Gaza. This is about black voters. You can go ahead and obsess about Gaza all you want, but that's not going to change the political calculus in November. That was what Mehdi Hassan was saying in the video that I posted earlier. The Democrats have already taken into account that if all the Arab vote turns against them, so what? There's not enough of them to actually matter. But if the black vote does, that's a problem. And beyond that, if it's firmly established in the public mind that it is black issues and interests that the black vote has become disciplined around that cost the Democrats the election, That to them is the sum of all fears. And as a constituency, as people who are putting black first, it's our responsibility to make sure that when they talk about politics, when they talk about what's on the ballot, it better be black empowerment on the ballot. And if it's not, that's okay. We will gladly take the mic and say it for ourselves. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Codified Trucking, Stay Positive, Ronald Waits, Anthony Pruitt, and Black Voltron Reloaded. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.